Okay, we are live. Well, welcome everybody to the Mobile Trends in Fintech to Watch webinar. I am very excited to be here. I am your host, Laura Hauser, and the VP of Marketing here at Bitrise. We'll give a few minutes for people to log in, but very excited that we have such a jam-packed agenda for everyone today. But before we begin, a little bit of housekeeping. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So you'll see throughout the panel that we're going to have some poll questions that we'd love for you guys to basically weigh in and tell us what's happening in your world. And we will have time for a Q&A session at the end. So please, if you do have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we will address them at the end of it. Additionally, if you have a question for a specific speaker or want to dig into something that someone has said, feel free to put the name of the person that you asked the question to, and we will ensure that we cover it at the end. So with that, again, we have so many topics to go through, but before we get started, I'd like our speakers to introduce themselves. We definitely have a group of industry leaders with a varied experience, but very much in mobile and with fintech. So with that, I'm going to hand things off to Karen.
Hi, Laura. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining today. I'm Karen and SVP of Mobile Security Solutions at Appdome. Appdome is an AI native platform that protects mobile apps and mobile SDKs in your CI/CD and DevOps pipeline without coding.
Awesome. And I'm going to hand things over to Jayson.
Hey, Jayson Dela Cruz over at FIS. Thanks for having me. FIS is a fintech provider for small to medium-sized banks that provides infrastructure and services, specifically a white label banking app that we can basically brand and distribute to all of our clients. So been building apps for a long time. Excited to be here.
Fantastic. And last but certainly not least, the accidental banker, David Jarvis.
Thank you. If I write a memoir, that's what I'm going to call it. Hi, I'm David. I'm co-founder and CEO of Griffin. We are a UK-based bank, and depending on where you are from when you're listening to this, you can think of us as a partner bank, a banking as a service bank, a clearing bank, any or all of these terms work. The bottom line is we're quite unusual. We don't bank retail consumers. We don't bank normal businesses. We only bank fintechs and platforms.
Fantastic. So before we, get started, 2025 has been pretty eventful, to say the least. Lots going on in the news, but has there been anything, we're coming into the end of Q1, beginning of Q2. Has there been anything that has not been on your bingo card for 2025? I'm going to kick things off with you, Karen.
Yeah, so what we've seen is just a huge increase in AI-driven attacks, and AI is being used to create faster attacks, more sophisticated attacks than ever before. So you've probably seen a lot about deepfakes and the use of deepfakes to bypass Face ID and other authentication mechanisms, and that's where we see a lot of authentication in companies dealing with authentication in their mobile apps having to scramble a bit. And so we've been working with a lot of customers and other companies address how they deal with this new reality and the need to have, cryptographically verifiable way of authenticating and what that means in terms of security and in their mobile apps, as well as the mobile SDKs that their developers are using to integrate, their platforms into mobile.
It's been incredible to see just the amount that hackers have been able to really spearhead and make this an interesting space. David, what about you? What is not on your bingo card for 2025 but has really come to the forefront?
I mean, when we did this prep a week ago, I wouldn't have put like the collapse of the global financial system on my bingo card, but that does now seem like it's like potentially in play. Yeah, I mean, I think, like Karen, I've been kind of worried about the deepfake thing for quite a while, and it does seem that this is the year in which we've really reached a point where a lot of your traditional liveness checks, document validation is kind of really at risk as a kind of ongoing practice. And the only way that kind of gets addressed is a heavier reliance on biometrics and cryptographically verifiable sort of identity proofs. I think, the more broad AI stuff is also really interesting to me. I think I am like a little bit of an AI skeptic, I guess, from like a business model perspective. But then about like once a quarter, our engineers show up with something that's like absolutely bonkers that blows my mind. And so that happened earlier today. So I'm not allowed to talk about what it is yet, but I'm like, oh, well, we didn't have an AI strategy until today, and now we might have one. So that's pretty interesting and fun and cool, and will be the next month is going to be very interesting for us.
Incredible. And Jayson, what about you? What's been surprising you besides, the potential of the global financial collapse?
Yeah, I think AI is a really interesting space because of the potential. But I think for anyone who has been hands-on with trying to do something with AI, it becomes clear pretty quickly how untrustworthy it can be in a lot of aspects. There's a lot of people expecting it to be way smarter than it is. And I think Anthropic and a lot of researchers are really going into the details of like, well, we're building AI that also uses AI, that also uses AI to do this thing, and relying on it telling us what it's thinking when it's a lot of times just telling us what we want to hear. So I think it's going to be interesting seeing the limits of what we can do with it and what kind of guardrails we can do without relying on the outputs of the AI itself, because a lot of this is pretty simplified, like give me the right answer deal. And when all things are about giving you what makes you happy, that's not always going to be accurate. Another thing that is popped off recently is MCP, Model Context Protocol. It's basically like they market it as USB for AI to be able to plug in this stuff. I know Bitrise just released an MCP server for Bitrise, and been playing around with some of this stuff. But what's really missing is security. I had this idea of like, oh yeah, what if we just replace all of our APIs with some MCP server that's able to serve you exactly what you need based on who you are? But it's a really, really risky bottleneck at this point, where you could use it for data that's not secure, but for anything fintech and that is secure, I really approach it with caution. The standard's only been around for 3 months, so it's not really robust enough yet to handle our use case. And it sucks as fintech to be at the end of the line, but that's the reality a lot of times.
Yep, that makes perfect sense. And I can say, jumping on the AI train, and I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't give a plug for the Bitrise MCP server that was launched yesterday. But what's crazy is just the ability to actually chat with your CI or whatever tool it is that you're using. It maybe, gave me faith that I could one day be a mobile developer without actually needing to learn how to code. Although I'm sure I probably just lost half our audience with that comment. But speaking of AI, we want to see, our audience tell us, everyone at home, what are you seeing, or what are, currently, how are you using AI in your mobile fintech development process? Come on, people. Let's see. Get going. Ooh, it's possible that, okay. Starting to get some, and I do apologize, everyone. I did not bring my elevator music, but, it looks like we have, quite a bit of variation here. But while we're letting the results roll in, I would say, what is it, or I guess this question is for David, as an API first bank, you're supporting fintechs from a banking partner perspective and a technology platform perspective. Have you guys been seeing your customers use AI and machine learning to enhance personalization?
So I don't know that we've gotten to personalization, but going back to the ability to kind of like have a dialogue in an MCP style thing. Mo, who heads up marketing for us, told me today that he had a call with a prospect where they basically tried to live code an app against our API, like on the sales call, which is wild to think about. And I mean, again, as an API first company, to see that like taken up as a practice, like really, it raises really interesting questions around like, what is our target market, right? Like, I mean, and to what extent should we be thinking about ourselves and writing, principally for founders and product people and developers versus, like executives? I suppose, like, how technical does our audience need to be if they're able to, open up like a window with Claude or something and plug in an MCP server and then just be like, cool, great, I want like these user interfaces and I want to be able to plug into like this stuff. It's really, really interesting and exciting, and also a little terrifying. My impression from Mo is like that call was like fascinating and amazing, but also didn't quite get to where it needed to be, which is, I think, often the case with AI. Like the potential's there, but it's like it's still a little uncanny valley.
Absolutely. And Karen, Appdome works with several sort of tech companies building mobile apps. What is, looking at the results here, is we're kind of split in the leading answers of really using AI powered testing and automation being at the forefront, but also a significant amount is not using AI yet, but looking into it. How does this sort of relate to what you're seeing in the market?
Yeah, so I think a lot of organizations are figuring out how they're going to use AI, and like Jayson mentioned, there are a lot of security and fraud related issues that have to be considered as they go through that process, especially as it relates to banking and payments and other financial transactions. A lot of the detection in the past has been focused on the transaction level, looking for anomalies and amounts, locations, and things like that. But developers really need to look at more than that, especially as the bad actors are using different tools and methods to get earlier in the process. And so things like using various API calls is something they, developers need to be careful of, and in how they use these different new technologies, and that's where being able to detect early where the issues are is important, but also having a way of, in the mobile app itself, while the mobile app is live and running, being able to stop new attacks, because as with every new technology, it is always exploited by hackers, by fraudsters, to do things that weren't intended.
Absolutely. And when you're, building and running an app that is basically responsible for payments or, people's wallets, their money, the stakes are much higher. Jayson, I'm curious, you saw from our audience that, one of the biggest use cases for AI is AI-powered test automation. And it seems to be really catching on. I know it is in our team, especially as a CI/CD provider. But how effective is it in a highly regulated environment, such as fintech? Like, what are the challenges that you've run into?
I think, for all the skeptics out there, AI is far and away better at specific things, for like really targeted things like detecting fraud within a transaction list, or for us, AI powered like UI test automation, rather than relying on locators, just looking at the screen and clicking, like it'll be way faster, way more accurate. But the things that are hard about testing are still going to be hard, like having the right data to really exercise the edge cases. You can use AI to generate that stuff, but a lot of the infrastructure for fintech is it's quite complicated. You can't just make a bunch of test accounts in production and use that. But production's really where a lot of things fall apart. I mentioned it before, but like, the more production like it is, the more you're fighting against a lot of your own security tools to get testing running. So you'd get flagged and you'd have to write exceptions, and it's just really involved.
Absolutely. I mean, and you bring up a good point, because one of the biggest use cases is AI generated code, which is absolutely exponentially, increasing the amount of code you're able to produce. But doing this at scale introduces a lot more risk. David, why do you think the risk is so much bigger for mobile apps versus web apps?
Well, I mean, as we know, right? Like once it's out the door and in the App Store and it's been downloaded, that's it, right? So there's no fast and easy recall on that. And so historically, right, we haven't necessarily had. I don't know. Like there are times when technology kind of moves in bursts of speed, right? So the early days of mobile were kind of a mess. Like let's be real. It's weird now to say, like, I mean, it's like 20 years ago, but like it's definitely like all kind of figuring things out like as we went. In the same way that the early days of the internet were like kind of a mess. And something like AI just introduces a degree of like turbocharged security surface area that we don't have that much experience battle testing. And there's going to be weird and wonky stuff that we all discover collectively that is really, really awkward and painful. Yeah, I mean, I'm relieved to not personally be in the business of shipping mobile apps. Let me put it that way.
Well, what a great and inspiring statement for our audience. Can I ask, does anyone have any advice for those, trying to avoid those awkward and risky, potential, I'd say, impacts of AI?
I got some. I mean, like, there's a lot involved in coding. You could use AI to write your unit tests. You could use AI to write your UI. You could use AI to write your business logic. And those all come with a different set of risks and a different set of upsides and downsides. So I think I'd say to be really concise about how you're applying it and not using it to do the entire, try to use it to do the entire development process, because it's just not ready for that. My rule of thumb is that anytime you use AI, it'll probably get you about 70% of the way there. But anyone who does development will tell you that last 20 or 10% will be the majority of the time, the majority of your work. It's really hard to get something production ready.
Absolutely. And I think I saw somewhere that only about 10% of any AI generated code actually makes it into production. Yeah, I'm curious, Jayson, in terms of FIS's perspective on or what is FIS's perspective on using AI generated code? Where do you think this will go?
I mean, every company's best interest is to keep up with the market and to just make sure that their developers are trained and aware and can take advantage of these things once they're ready. But like I said, fintech is usually at the end of the line because the risk is so high. So we have sort of a very risk-averse perspective where certain people are allowed to use it for very certain use cases, and the rest of us are using Copilot and just the general question and answer. It's not yet plugged into everything that we're doing, but there are little pockets where it's a little bit more available. But we expect that to change. A lot of it is waiting on legal ramifications and waiting on a lot of lawsuits and copyright stuff to get through, because the risk is okay, we may be told to take these things down. We may be told to open source all the stuff that's generated by AI, or we may be told to pay for damages for whoever ends up suing us. So it's a pretty new space. Yeah, a lot of risk.
I can imagine. Well, I think that, when we talk about risk, you can't really talk about AI in the context of fintech without talking about, fraud and security. Karen, I'm curious, what strategies can mobile developers, employ to integrate, AI-driven fraud detection mechanisms in order to stop some of the AI-generated fraud?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think it's a combination of things. So there are a lot of organizations that are doing fraud detection, but it's also important to look at preventing fraud or stopping it from the beginning, because with payments, the funds are gone and damage is done. And a lot of financial transactions are like that. So what's important, especially with AI, because these campaigns, these attacks are happening faster and bigger than before, it's important to look at the tools that the fraudsters use, the methods that they're using to attack, because those things are happening. Those tools are being used. Those methods are being used months, weeks before the actual attacks happen. And so it's important to understand, detect those things and stop them so the hackers can't get the data they need to launch those attacks. And in order to do that, you need to integrate these protections into the app itself. You need to integrate them into the detection mechanisms and the protections into the mobile SDK itself. So you start early in the process, right? Avoid those risks later on, avoid the fraud later on, because you have this blocked off early. And in that way, the app itself is self-defending and can stop these attacks as they come in.
Absolutely. And, one of the biggest challenges, especially with fintech, is kind of balancing fraud detection and then blocking, legitimate transactions. Like nothing is worse when, something happens and you're unable to use your, digital wallet or, your Monzo app. How do you recommend that basically fintechs, how do you do AI fraud protection or prevention without blocking legitimate transactions? How do you find that balance?
Yeah, so this is again where having that combination of detections and tools in place is really important. So understanding, okay, if the fraudster is using ADB right now on the mobile app, that's really not a good way of interacting with the app. So understanding if that's happening, plus some other strange transactions coming together, that combination is clearly not a good thing, and block that. Or having a way of detecting all of these different things that we talked about, the use of emulators, the use of different tools like Frida or Magisk. Seeing that early on is going to help rule out the false positives and get organizations focused on really what's the problem. And so it's having this extra layer and this additional way of looking at the methods of attack and the tools that are used, that's really important. In addition to having that protection in the app itself, so that when something bad happens, you close the app or have a notification go out, so the user's experience is still maintained and is still as seamless as possible.
And how do you ensure that? Is that through robust testing or just choosing sort of the right tools that allow you to embed that functionality?
Yeah, so this is where I think the partnership between Bitrise and Appdome is great. So we actually work together with a lot of companies to put those protections in the app itself, so that those protections are there without the developers having to code. Those protections are maintained, meaning over 300, 400 different protections that keep up with all the AI changes are integrated into the app. So the sort of risks of attacks coming in while the app is live go away or are much more mitigated, and that's because the protections are there in the app itself. Yes, you can do testing, and you absolutely should do that to identify issues in the source code, but the protections that we're talking about are at the binary level, and that makes sure that the data in the app is encrypted, not only within the app, but at runtime. So while the app is running, and any kind of communication between the app and the end server is also protected.
Awesome. We've seen a huge rise in deep fakes. And David, given that Griffin is a banking provider and a technology embedded finance platform as well, you spend a lot of time thinking about KYC, KYB. Given visual authentication is basically the biggest way that a lot of fintechs actually do this or do authentication. How do you think that this rise in deepfakes will impact fintechs, mobile apps that are trying to stay compliant?
I honestly have no idea. I can tell you like where I think we should go, which is to some sort of cryptographic government issued identity sort of authentication authorization mechanism. And so, there aren't that many places that have this, right? Estonia is one. So, you have a like a physical card that you can use that can authenticate you for government services and also for like banking services. And it's the same one, which is quite powerful and quite cool. And I think the last time I interfaced with one of these was almost 8 years ago, so quite a while ago now. But it's a good combination of the classic like strong customer authentication requirements of having what what you have, who you are. But it's like the old sort of joke, right? Who are you going to believe, like me or your lying eyes? And it's like, well, actually, like your eyes like might lie to you now. Like it's a really weird place to be. And I wouldn't describe myself as a paranoid person, but I am a very, very kind of like OPSEC first person. And for people who don't like live and breathe and think about threat modeling and security vulnerabilities and the sort of attacker surface area, I just like I really, really worry about how this is going to play out. I mean, we already, at least in the UK, and I think in the US as well, have a huge, huge problem with fraud, particularly since the pandemic. And I think this is just going to make it like that much harder for people, normal people, to be able to deal with it, let alone the sort of institutions that are supposed to protect them.
Absolutely. Well, I think we could spend hours talking about AI in mobile apps for fintech, but one of the big hot topics we want to hit is actually embedded finance. So we're going to ask our audience, what is the biggest challenge that you face when building embedded finance features? And I think it wouldn't be right to not kick this off with you, David. As that banking partner that literally enables mobile developers to embed financial products into your apps or into their apps. What is the number one mistake that they should avoid when building this type of functionality?
A lot will depend really on whether or not they themselves are a regulated firm, right? So in Europe, unlike in the US, in the US, largely you're kind of a bank or you're nothing. Like, yes, there are other licenses, brokerage licenses, money transfer licenses, et cetera, but it tends to be quite bifurcated. Whereas in Europe, you have a much wider range of kind of lighter weight regulatory frameworks, but you also have companies that are offering financial services that are not regulated, where compliance is a bit of a blind spot for them, and they can be a little wishful maybe in their thinking about, oh, well, I thought I was outsourcing all of that to you. And it's like, right, but like, I'm not actually making your app. I'm an infrastructure provider and I'm a partner to you. And so, yeah, the compliance element of that becomes a big challenge. I mean, like at a business level, I think fraud prevention at like a commercial level becomes a big challenge, in terms of, all right, well, you know, as an infrastructure provider, we can't, there's only so much that we can do to stop fraud, right? So we can pattern match against various things, but there's a lot of power in stuff like what Monzo has built, where, you know, if someone calls you and claims to be from Monzo, there is a feature in the app that you can go to that just says, is someone from Monzo calling you right now, right? And it like and they really like push that out as like a security feature where they're like, people will call you and pretend to be from Monzo. You can open the app and see if it is us. Like that is like so clever and powerful. So yeah, I mean, I think like security and fraud prevention and compliance and regulatory complexity have to be the top two for me, for sure.
Well, and it looks like you're matching our audience's view as well. You know, Jayson is someone who, you know, is living and breathing building fintech or trying to build secure fintech apps. What do you think is a mistake to try and avoid when, you know, embedding financial products? Oh, you're on mute.
Hi, I think the one thing to really understand is what you're embedding, really understanding the responsibilities of that vendor, what their SLA is, because at the end of the day, when you're sticking something into your app, you as the developer are responsible to make sure that they're keeping up with all the OS updates. They are responsive to any bugs that get reported or any security vulnerabilities that are there. And you're sort of tying your fate to this vendor for all time. So just to be really careful, and there's a lot of product push for implementing new things and a lot of vendors obviously offering the latest and greatest, but there's a lot to be said about what their track record is or what their capability is for meeting your needs. Are you just getting an SDK and calling it a day, or are you developing towards the same end goal? Is the UI going to match what your app is going to do? And I understand that not everyone works at the scale that we do, but I think it's just general SDK integration sanity and best practices.
Got it. Karen, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake to avoid is that app security is back-end security or protecting the infrastructure is the same thing as app security. And a lot of organizations may feel like, well, if my back end is secure, then my mobile apps and all my users are also secure. But the challenge is really the mobile app is the front line, you know, where credentials, the private keys, all that important information is stored. And if attackers can tamper with that app, then anything can bypass that back end. And, you know, you look at a lot of the fraud that's happening and where the malware is attacking, and that's at the app layer itself. And so it's really important to protect the mobile app as well as the mobile SDK. So the weak links are in, you know, the traditional mobile wallets for traditional wallets that may be using Face ID or some kind of authentication process that can be faked, you know, and so it's important to protect that process, protect accounts from account takeover. So in general, I'd say going back to what David was saying before about people calling you while you're using your mobile app, that's one of the biggest areas that I have personally seen just talking and working with people who have been attacked, that the fraud happens is while the app is open, somebody calls. And so for that reason, Appdome has a specific feature called phishing, which detects when a call is happening while the app is open, and then the app can close or a notification can be sent out saying, hey, there's something likely not good happening here, and you know you will be able to use the app once you're in a safer place. But yeah, in general, it's making sure that the mobile app is secure and all the connections between the mobile app and any other backend servers is also secure. That's, I think, a big thing that people have to watch out for.
That's great to hear, because I was wondering, talking about the Monzo example, are those things, or are those features that only really the huge, big fintechs can offer, or is it possible for small startups that are just launching their fintech app able to leverage as well?
Yeah, so I would say absolutely, and this is where tools like Appdome can help with that. We have those features built in, so the small startups don't have to keep up with all these new things. For number one, and number two, they don't have to code or build these features in themselves.
It's great that to start thinking ahead. We've talked a lot about the challenges that embedding in AI, or just the way to think about compliance from embedded finance features. But in the era of efficiency, where everyone is trying to move as fast as possible, balancing the need for sort of compliance, but also keeping your mobile development speed at pace. Jayson, do you have any advice in terms of how to find that balance between, keeping builds fast while managing, dependencies and compliance challenges?
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, at the end of the day, every app becomes so complex that you spend a lot of time meeting compliance and like dealing with Android and Apple than just developing things. And you can have your team be developing 5-6 features a month, but if you can't get them out the door and you can't pass App Store review in a timely manner, then it doesn't matter. For us, a lot of that goes to really robust Bitrise pipelines, having automated testing and automated steps for every step in the pipeline, and also demystifying that with your developers. There shouldn't be a culture of developers just tossing things over the phone and expecting them to get out the door. They really need to understand what it takes and be able to work on it. Otherwise, your is being
Great. I think we got a little bit of feedback, or am I the only one that heard that from Jayson?
Is that me or is that David?
Well, that's okay. We'll figure it out. It wouldn't be a live webinar if there wasn't at least one technical difficulty. We've talked a bit about embedded finance in general, but when we're one of the biggest things, or the hottest things right now, is digital wallets. David, as someone who is the banking and technology provider, are we headed towards wallet overload, or are there room for new players?
Yeah, but I mean, the wallet space is super interesting because we've got two things going on that are fascinating. So, I mean, the first is the kind of explosion of stablecoin usage, particularly in developing economies for cross-border transactions, and just for sort of general purposes. But then the other thing is, like wallets as a conceit were really born in the zero interest era, and in a higher rate environment, there is a real question over like the superiority of ease of use versus the yield you get from a traditional bank. And obviously it kind of depends where you are, right? So you can't have the best of both worlds. But in Europe, for instance, if you are using an electronic money institution's wallets capabilities, they're not allowed to pay you interest. And so that then means that most of the wallets that most people have been using in Europe and the broader European regulatory framework are at a serious disadvantage. And so a lot of what we find ourselves doing these days is looking for use cases and places where people have deployed wallets as a core part of the product proposition, and saying, hey, that like we could just make that a bank account. Like you could get the low cost, the ease of use, the tech forward, like integration capabilities, but like also have it be covered by deposit insurance, and also have it have like a bank grade yield. Like that's quite appealing. The direction of travel for this is really interesting though, right? Like one of the things that so Laura and I have known each other for a while, and she used to work here, and I'm sure she heard me say this at some point in like one of my many pitches to people. But like one of the things about the embedded finance peak hype cycle in 2021, where you had Angela Strange and Andreessen Horowitz and stuff going around saying like every company is going to become a fintech company. It's like, yeah, maybe, but like every company is not going to issue their own branded card, right? Like that's ridiculous. Consumers are not going to walk around with like 25 cards in their wallet or even on their within their like Apple Pay, Google Pay kind of stored virtual card thing. So there is some level of fatigue there, I think, and there is some like Dunbar's number for how many credit cards you can actually have or how many wallets you can actually have. But I think we are still going through a significant period of flux and evolution. I think it's very clear that there is significant appetite from people, and particularly younger people, he says, a 38-year-old, to like not be with like a traditional old school bank, right? So like you have millions of people in the UK who are banking with one of the challengers who didn't exist 10 years ago. Like that's a huge sea change. You don't have as many new fully authorized banks in the US, but you do have obviously tons of businesses banking with Mercury, tons of individuals banking with Chime. And they're not banks, but they're their customers are putting a lot of faith in them to kind of, and they really do think of them as banks. So yeah, I don't know. I'm always bullish on people's willingness to engage in certain changes of behavior when faced with like superior products. So yeah.
Very cool. Well, I'll agree with you there. I think we've been seeing some just incredible innovation coming out of the space, and we'll continue to. Well, we're wrapping up, but before we leave, it wouldn't be a Bitrise webinar without talking a little bit about the challenges, specifically when you're talking about a fintech app or anything sort of related with money. What have been, you lovely audience, what are your biggest challenges when building fintechs for iOS or Android? I will let the answers roll in. But while we're waiting for our audiences to give us their opinion, which I'm sure they're not shy about. Jayson, you know the space really well. When it comes to iOS versus Android, what's the most frustrating part of building, fintech apps that work seamlessly on both platforms? Oh, I think you're muted still.
It's fragmentation for sure. I mean, as a diehard Android person, I know that with so much choice and like difference in hardware capabilities, there comes the cost of like, how do you test on all these things? And the long and short answer is that you can't really get to 100%. You can test on every iOS device that's possible and make sure that you cover all those cases, but on Android, it's just not the same game. But users don't care. They a lot of times expect it to be in parity. They expect you to have the releases same day, same time, exact same UI, but it's just not like that. And depending on what your technology choices are upfront, are you developing two separate apps? Do you have two separate teams? Or are you using something like React Native where you can just build once and somewhat get a parity experience out of the box? It can just be really challenging.
Absolutely.
And
Karen, what about you? Sorry?
It's a moving target because there's new capabilities and new things happening all the time. Like, does your app work on foldables? Like, how many users are using foldables? Are they going to become a big thing or not? Like, it's hard.
Constant headaches. Yeah, and if you look at our audience, there's a clear winner trending, and that is optimizing app performance for both platforms. I'm curious, any of our panelists have any input on, is this what you're seeing in the market as well, Karen?
Yeah, so it is different when you're talking about building in the security measures, security protections that you need for iOS versus Android. And it's important to make sure that you have a solution that is considering both, differently, right? Because for iOS, there may be more concerns about phishing, because Face ID is used in iOS for handling the biometric authentication, but deepfakes, like we talked about earlier, and the use of deepfakes is a problem, or can be a bigger problem. Also, bypassing jailbreaking, but also jailbreak bypass is another issue to worry about, versus Android, where there are a lot of attacks, say, on the accessibility features that Android has provided. And so the misuse of accessibility, which was intended for all good purposes, right? It was intended to help people with disabilities use their Android devices better. But if there are attacks on them, if there are ways that hackers are getting in to use those services and then do their own things, then that's a problem. Also, malware. There are a lot of specific malware attacks, especially with banks. There are banking Trojans, a number of banking Trojans, like Xenomorph and Sharkbot, that are targeting Android apps. And so those are specific things to watch out for. So in general, you just want to have a strategy where you have an OS specific set of protections that you're building in. And at the same time, you want to be able to detect any new behaviors, right? So there's all the stuff that is happening and that's bad right now, but there's always the new stuff. And so that's where we talked earlier about having the ability to detect the use of tools, the use of methods that then hackers are using to create new attacks, and launch new, basically, problem for people comes in.
Yeah, it's just an ongoing cycle, isn't it? Well, I know we're running a little bit over, but want to give it time for at least one audience question. And for all of those that we're not getting to, don't worry, we'll follow up. This one is actually for Jayson. What automation implementation gave your team the biggest sort of velocity boost when building a mobile app?
Yeah, I was literally typing up an answer and trying to type as quietly as I could. But honestly, some of the basics, like having a pipeline that runs as much testing as soon as a PR is opened. Before that PR is merged, getting early, as corny as it is, like pushing testing to the left. Like, it sounds simple, but depending on your technology choices and depending on the maturity of your code base, it could be really hard. Are you working on a legacy thing without a really robust unit test set? Or are you working evergreen, where you can define those standards from the jump and then have that baked into not just your development pipeline, but the culture of your team? Culture is one of the last things that changes. So you really only get a chance to reset it if you rewrite something from scratch. So if you are on that journey, establish your pillars from the jump and then say that, these things are non-negotiable. Unit test coverage, end-to-end testing, integration testing has to be. Otherwise, you can build something really fast, but the moment you try to iterate on it, everything falls apart.
Got it. Well, that's hopefully something that Bitrise has helped you and your team out with, but it's fantastic to hear that is sort of the foundation and for speed in building mobile fintechs app. We are wrapping up, but before we do, I want to give our lovely panel a chance to answer one final question. And that is, if our audience could take away one thing or one piece of advice that we've talked about today, what would it be? And maybe we could start with you, Karen.
Yeah, so I would say you want to have a multi-pronged strategy here. Like we talked about before, it's important to have the fraud detection on the transaction level, but also you need to have the ability to detect any kind of fraud with, say, the authentication, with especially as account takeovers are becoming more rampant. You need a better way to basically provide protections in the mobile app and the mobile SDK for these new ways of presenting your identity, of people presenting their identity. And so that involves not only for traditional wallets, protecting that authentication process, but also for crypto wallets. And like David was saying before, consumers expect that range, that breadth of digital wallets. And so it's not just the traditional payment wallet, but it's also stable coins and crypto and CBDCs, in the future. And for those types of wallets, it's important to protect the private key, because most of the hacks, the fraud that has been happening around mismanagement or lack of protection of those private keys. And so that's where being able to encrypt these keys is really important, as well as ensuring the transmission of those private keys is secure. And then, like we talked before, detecting when tools are used to extract the keys or other things like that. So in general, it's an interesting world we live in, and that shift is happening. But the good thing is there are a lot of tools out there and methods out there to protect people as they move forward.
Yeah, great advice. David, what about you?
I mean, I think it's kind of weird to say, but like, there's going to be like some cutoff point, potentially like this year, after which you're going to need to seriously ask yourself if users that you onboard are agents or robots or what have you. Like, the people who you onboarded, in the last 5-10 years, those are probably fine. They could be considered whatever grandfathered in. But yeah, I think everything having to do with onboarding, and particularly onboarding in a mobile environment, is going to need like a major revamp over the next 12-18 months.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jayson, final thoughts.
Yeah, I know that you guys brought me here for the dev perspective, so I'm gonna keep it a little simple. Is that at the end of the day, these are new features you're building on top of an app. So all of the best practices that you use to make your development smooth and enable testing still apply here, but it will be even harder because now you're working with biometrics. Now you're working with more APIs that are being developed, and those things just come with a lot more headache to test right. Wallets, for example, go ahead and try to test a wallet right now. Go ahead and sign up for all the accounts, see if you have enough space on your developer account. How many phones do you have? How do you test on all your phones? How do you test on all the locales? How do you fight against, it just becomes really complex really quickly. So I would suggest just trying to do things the right way rather than doing things fast, because you can do anything really, really fast, but that technical debt racks up, and it can rack up to the point where you're suddenly stuck in the water and you can't get anything out the door.
Absolutely. Well, I think, wrapping up, the stakes are really high when it comes to the mobile fintech experience. And it's really trying to find, the balance, the right tools, and the right approach to make sure that you're moving fast and providing the best experience for customers, while also thinking about everything from fraud, cybersecurity, and the newest threat or opportunity that AI will, undoubtedly, bring to the forefront, tomorrow morning. Thank you, everyone who tuned in and stayed extra to hear, the final insights from our guests. A big thank you to our panel for joining us today, and we really hope that you guys enjoyed the content and found it valuable. All right, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.